Welcome to the Feasts of YaHuWaH series. In this teaching, we are going to look at one of the most important and beautiful pictures of redemption in the entirety of the scriptures, the Pesach, which is called the Passover, and Hagmatzoth, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We know that YaHuWaH's word is eternal, it is forever. He has commanded that his feasts and his Sabbaths, his Shabbatot, should be observed forever, le'olam, throughout eternity, and that they are a picture of the Malkut, the kingdom, the reign of Yahuwah Elohim that is coming. So we are preparing and rehearsing when we observe these precepts, because they are called Kodesh Mikra. That word Kodesh means pure, and Mikra literally means a rehearsal, a convocation, a gathering. So we are rehearsing for something which is to come. We learned this in the first few teachings when we discovered the Shabbat, the Sabbath, the eternal, perpetual seventh-day Sabbath that Yahuwah Elohim gave to his people, because it was he who rested. In Genesis, Bereshith chapter 2, it says, "Wayah Shabbat," and he rested. But the word there, Shabbat, not only means rest, but it means the Sabbath, the Shabbat. Yahuwah Elohim gave the Shabbat. He was the one who first kept the Shabbat, and the Shabbat is eternal. It is a picture of the kingdom. We will rest from our labors, rest from all of our trials that we had upon the earth. And we also discovered the Rosh Chodesh, which is the renewal of the moon. The moon gives us our month in Yahuwah's calendar. The moon cycle is roughly 29.5 days, around 30 days, which equates to what a month is in the Hebrew calendar, in Yahuwah Elohim's calendar. And also we discovered the Rosh Hashanah, the chief or the head point of the year, which begins in the Chodesh, the month or the moon cycle of Ha-Abib, the Abib, which is literally the ripening of Hasorah, the barley heads. And this is an agriculturally based calendar. According to the Torah, we are told to look for the change in the seasons that will be declared by the sighting of the barley. When the sun begins to give an increase of light upon the earth. This time period happens anywhere from the time period of what is called the equilux to the time period of what is called an equinox. And it is also seen in the stars in the constellation of Aries, which is the ram. We've already discovered all these things, and these things all have very important, deep meanings. But now that we have discovered the Shabbat and the idea of the time period of the seventh day, evening to evening Sabbath that should be observed throughout our generations, and now that we have understood how that we should reckon our months and our years, it is now time to discover the 7 annual feasts of Yahuwah Elohim. Because Yahuwah has given us 7 festivals, 7 feasts that should be observed every single year forever. Le'olam, according to his own word. And the first festival that happens in the first month of the year is the Pesach, the Passover. Now, our base text for this entire series has been Vayikra Leviticus chapter 23. We've already read verses 1 through 4, 1 through 5 actually, and we looked at them in great detail. But now we are going to look at the Pesach, the Passover. So in Leviticus Vayikra chapter 23, in verse 4, These are the appointed times, the Moedim, appointments of YaHuWaH. Now, note, these are not the appointed times of man. This is not some tradition of man, but this is the actual word of the living Elohim, the I am that I am, Hayah Asher Hayah, the one who exists forever. Yahuwah has told us to do these things. And when he speaks and tells us to meet with him, and he says it's an appointment, we want to be there at the proper time. It's very critical to understanding the actual prophetic meanings of the Passover and the unleavened bread and all of the feasts, the 7 festivals of Yahuwah Elohim. But Yahuwah says these are his appointed times. Now we know that there are some who say, well, the Passover is the Passover of the Jews. And what they mean is that they have seen the Yahudim, those who are of the tribe of Yehudah, Benjamin, and Levi, observe the Passover throughout these generations, but they've never seen the Christians observe the Passover. Because Christians observe Ishtar or Easter, which is the name of a Babylonian fertility goddess. Now, because they don't understand, they say, well, these are, just the feasts of the Jews. Well, what they don't understand is these are the festivals of the living Creator, and he gave these festivals to the house of Yasharel, to the 12 tribes of Yasharel, that they should observe it, but also that the strangers and the sojourners, as we are going to discover in this very lesson, were required to observe these ordinances forever as well, because they were to be grafted in to the olive tree, which is Israel, which is Yasharel, and to walk in Yahuwah's ordinances, in his ways, and to guard his covenant, and to guard his precepts. So these are the appointed times of Yahuwah. Kodesh Mikra, set apart gatherings. That word Kodesh, again, set apart, not only set apart as in something that is special in the way that you think, but something that is pure, untainted, something that is what people would look at as sanctified, or it's deeper than we can even describe in the English language what Kodesh literally means. Because Yahuwah Elohim is called the Kodesh one. His spirit, his Ruach is called the Kodesh, HaChodesh. So it's really important to understand that this is something that is special. It is not just, some little holiday like we see the other religions have that have no specific meaning, but go back to pagan deities of the various pantheons of Babylon and Greece and Rome and Persia and all these things. But Yahuwah Elohim, he is set apart. He is special. He is not an idol made with hands, but the living one. And he says that we are not only to have a Kodesh Mikra, Kodesh gathering, but the word Mikra means literally, it is a rehearsal. It is a preparation. We are preparing to meet with the Creator because he is going to establish his kingdom on the earth, and there's nothing that can be done about it. There's no one who can stop it. It has been foretold by the prophets of old, and it will come to pass. And when it comes to pass, the festivals of Yahuwah, the Sabbaths, and the new moons, these observations will continue. And we see this clearly in the book of Isaiah Yeshayahu, chapter 65 through 66. You can read in your own time. We've already gone over this information, the previous lessons. But for right now, let's focus on what we're seeing here. This is a Kodesh rehearsal of the living Yahuwah Elohim, which you are to proclaim. The word proclaim literally means to kara, to preach, to profess, and to announce. So we're to announce these things in their proper times, in their appointed times. We're to teach about these things. We are to proclaim that these things are true, to proclaim them when they happen. So this is a duty, an actual mitzvot, an actual command that we are to do, to proclaim, to kara, at their appointed times. So it's important to have your appointment with Yahuwah not on your calendar, but on his calendar at his time when he decrees. We're meeting with him at his appointment. We don't want to be late. We don't want to be too early, but we want to be there at just the right time. These are the appointed times of YaHuWaH. Kodesh Mikra, set apart gatherings, which you are to proclaim at their appointed times. In the first new moon, in Rishon Chodesh, on the 14th day of the new moon. So when you see the sliver that begins the new year in the time period of Abib, when you see this and you count 14 days, you are going to land on the 14th of the new moon. Okay, so on the 14th of the new moon, Bein Ha'arabim, between the evenings. Now the word evening in Hebrew is Ereb, and Ereb means mixture, and it refers to literally the mixing of the colors that can be seen in the western sky. When the sun sets, we see that the cooler colors are beginning to transition in and the warmer colors are transitioning out. You can see the beautiful reds and the oranges and the blues and all these colors over the horizon. And about 15 minutes from that point, we will see our 2 or 3 witnesses in the Shamayim, the Kokabim, the stars, that will tell us that officially a new day has begun, because a day ends in the evening and a new day transitions in and begins in the evening according to the calendar that we see in the Torah. Now, because it says Bein Ha'arabim, between the evenings, it is referring to the time period when the sun is out during the day of the 14th. So on the day of the 14th, the slaughter offering is given for the Pesach. And we know that this happens at the time of the evening Korban Tamid, which is the standing slaughter offering that is done daily. And this would be done around 3 p.m. on Roman time, which equates to the solar hour of the 9th hour if we were using a sun clock, when the degree on the sundial is showing to be at 9. This would be around the time of 3 p.m. This is the time of the evening slaughter offering, and the Pesach would be done at this time. Between the evenings is the Pesach le YaHuWaH, to YaHuWaH. And on the 15th day of this Chodesh, of this new moon, is the festival of Matzot, of unleavened bread, to YaHuWaH. 7 days you eat unleavened bread, or matzah, unleavened bread. Bread that does not have the contamination of seor. Seor is a fermented leavening agent, which is primarily made of the 5 grains which can be found in the land of Israel, or Yasharal. When these grains are allowed to ferment and create something much like a sourdough, or literally a sourdough, then it will make bread rise or create leavened bread, which in Hebrew we call chametz. When we have bread that has been used with the sourdough, it is chametz. It has the contamination of yeast. Now, we are not talking about things like sodium bicarbonate, which is a mineral, baking soda, things like that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that literally has the fermented agents that is called in the Hebrew, literally in the Torah, seor. We don't want to have seor. And we don't want to make a puffy bread out of our sourdoughs to make it chametz, or a puffy bread. So during this time period, the time of matzah, for 7 days, during Hag Matzot, we are going to eat matzah, or bread that has been prepared without sourdough, without the fermented leavening agent. And it is going to be flatbread, which is going to be called matzah. So this is the really important, many already know this, but there are many people who are new and learning these things. And on the 15th day of the new moon is the festival of Matzot. To YaHuWaH, 7 days you eat matzah or unleavened bread. On the first day you have a Kodesh Mikra, a set-apart gathering or rehearsal. So the first day of unleavened bread is going to have high significant meaning prophetically. It is a picture of something that happened. And we are going to see that it literally marks the time period of the Exodus. When Yahuwah Elohim smote Pharaoh's house, and he smote the houses of all the Mitzrayites with the death of the firstborn, the final plague of the 10 plagues, when Yahuwah Elohim poured out his wrath upon the land of Mitzrayim. On that night, we will see that Pharaoh commanded that Musha and all of the Abrit, all of the Hebrews, would leave from his land. And it was that night that marked the first of unleavened bread, and it was the beginning of a journey, a spiritual journey out of bondage, a spiritual and physical journey out of the slavery of pagan dominion, on the way to follow the King of Kings to the land that flows with milk and honey. The most beautiful idea of redemption we see clearly. There are so many foreshadowings in the Exodus, in the great migration from the land of Mitzrayim, which is presently called Egypt, and to the land which has been called in the ancient times the land of Canaan, or the land of Canaan, which is the land of Yasharel, the land of Yahuwah Elohim's people, where he made his name known, where he did mighty and excellent and awesome things. And as the Torah says, that the Torah must go forth from Zion, and the great prophet Yeshayahu Isaiah spoke that in the latter days it shall be that the Torah shall go forth from Har Zion, from Mount Zion. So Yahuwah Elohim's word will remain. It will be true forever. The 15th day of the first month in the year is the first day of unleavened bread. It is a Kodesh Mikra. It is a set-apart gathering. It is a time that marks the exodus from spiritual and physical slavery to a pagan system, which is a foreshadowing of what will happen in the end of time when the dominion of Babylon is over and Yahuwah sets his people free from the Babylonian system and destroys the image of Nebuchadnezzar. As Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, dreamed a dream, and he saw the world kingdoms, and the world kingdoms were made in his image and made in his likeness, and he saw a stone that came forth, that was cut out without hands, and it came and it hit the feet of Nebuchadnezzar and destroyed Babylon and destroyed its empires, which represented all of the empires of old, Rome and Egypt and Media Persia, as well as Babylon. And we saw that rock became a great mountain. And that rock, Daniel spoke to Nebuchadnezzar and said specifically, it is a picture of Elohim's kingdom which is coming. We know that his kingdom's coming, and that this picture, this day, the first day of unleavened bread, is a picture of all these things. We're going to discover that in great detail as we continue to study. So it says, on the 15th day of this new moon is the festival of matzah, or matzot. To YaHuWaH, 7 days you eat unleavened bread. On the first day you have that Kodesh, set apart gathering, that rehearsal. And you do no servile work, and you don't do any servile work because it marks your freedom. Free men do not do servile work. So therefore, on the day of the Exodus that marks that release from bondage, we are not to do any servile work upon that day. And you shall bring an offering made by fire to YaHuWaH for 7 days. On the 7th day is a Kodesh Mikra. You do no servile work. Again, the 7th day has great prophetic significance. For it was the seventh day, the final day of Matzah, when YaHuWaH Elohim swallowed up Pharaoh and his armies, and he covered them in the Yom Suf, in the Sea of Reeds, or what is today called the Red Sea. And we see today that there are still chariot wheels at the bottom of the Red Sea. A golden chariot wheel of Pharaoh's own chariot can still be seen on the bottom of the Yom Suf, because YaHuWaH Elohim delivered his people. And this is what we have to look forward to, and this is why we celebrate these times. And it said in the verse that an offering made by fire should be presented to YaHuWaH for 7 days. This was literally sacrifice that would be given to YaHuWaH Elohim. But at this time, we know that we're at a time where sacrifice at the Bet HaMikdash, the temple, the house of YaHuWaH Elohim, is impossible. So what does one do for 7 days? For 7 days, you are to be in a state of prayer and oblation, giving oblation to YaHuWaH. Because YaHuWaH said that he preferred that we would be obedient to him than even have sacrifice. And he also says through the word of the prophets that we are to offer up to him the bulls of our lips, the sacrifices that come forth from our own lips, our prayers, our tefillah, and our worship before YaHuWaH Elohim. And that is what we are to do. For 7 days, a special time. The first day will be a Kodesh Mikra. No work will be done, no servile work. And on the 7th day, another Kodesh Mikra. No work will be done. But those days, all of those days are days of prayer and focus on YaHuWaH Elohim and upon what he did for his people when he redeemed his people. Now, I want to go on a journey 3,500 years ago to the land of Mitzrayim, to the land of Egypt, where Yasharel, the tribes of YaHuWaH Elohim, are currently waiting for their redemption from YaHuWaH Elohim. And he sends to them a great prophet, a prophet of prophets, one whom all of the world would like to boast because they know that he truly was a prophet. And his name was Moshe, who they call Moses or Moshe. And Moshe, his very word, the very word of his name means to be drawn forth. The root of his word, from the root of his word, we get words like Mashiach, which means anointed, or one who is smeared with oil, which is where we get the concept of Messiah, because the kings of Yasharel and Yehuda were to be anointed. They were to be Mashiach. They were to be applied and smeared with the Kodesh anointing oil. And so Moshe is a picture of the coming Mashiach. And he comes not with a sword against Pharaoh, nor does he come with an army against Pharaoh, but he comes as a shepherd, a man who leads the flock. And he brings a shepherd's staff before the Pharaoh. And with this staff, YaHuWaH Elohim proclaimed his wonders in the land of Mitzrayim. We know that there is historical evidence that proves the Exodus, that proves the plagues. There are papyrus that were written in the land of Mitzrayim that actually recall the river Nile turning to blood, that recall the exodus of the slaves that were in Mitzrayim. But we know the Torah is true. The Torah itself speaks and tells us that YaHuWaH Elohim judged Pharaoh and judged his land, and he executed judgment upon all of his mighty ones, all of what Pharaoh called Elohim. He executed judgment upon all of his idols. YaHuWaH poured out 10 mighty plagues in the land of Mitzrayim. The first plague, he turned the Nile River and all the sources of water into blood, a direct attack against the Nile River deities Khnum and Hapi. And then the second plague, he poured out innumerable amounts of frogs upon the land of Mitzrayim, which was an attack against Heget, who is the female deity of reproduction that was depicted by the frog. She was seen as a frog sometimes and also having a frog's head, and in later periods wearing the solar sun crown that we see, and she was called Hecate, which later became Columbia, which is the image and form of the Statue of Liberty. The third plague was gnats. The gnats came forth from the dust of the earth, and because the rod was used by commandment of YaHuWaH to strike the ground, and that the dust became the gnats of the earth, it was an attack against Geb, who is seen as the mighty one of the earth in the Mitzrayite religion, and also against Khafre, which was the mighty one of the insects. And also he was attacked in the fourth plague, the plague of the stinging flies that consumed and covered the land and the ground of Mitzrayim, as the scriptures say. The fifth plague was the pestilence of the livestock. This was a direct attack against Hathor and Bat and Hapis, which are all bull-headed deities from which the golden calf, the idea of the golden calf in the wilderness came forth. YaHuWaH destroyed these mighty ones in the pestilence of the livestock. The sixth plague were boils that covered the flesh of the Mitzrayites, an attack against the mighty one of medicine, who is known as Isis, and Sechemet, who was the mighty one of plagues. And the seventh plague was the hail, fiery hail and thunder that came from the Shamayim and lightning. This was an attack against the sky deity, the female deity Nut, and Seth, who was the mighty one of chaos and thunder. And the plague of the locusts. And this was an attack against Sennacherib, who was seen as a locust-headed mighty one who was supposed to protect the land from the pestilence and from swarms of locusts. And the ninth plague was darkness that covered the entire land of Mitzrayim, an attack against Horus, who is the sky deity, and Ra, who is seen as the sun deity. And the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, was an attack against Pharaoh himself, who was supposed to be in control of the Nile River, who was supposed to be in control of the weather, who was supposed to be in control of the sun. He had set himself up as the mighty one of mighty ones, and his firstborn would die on the night of the Pesach. And also against men, who was the reproduction deity, and Anubis, the mighty one of death in the Mitzrayite religion. Now let us go and read what the Torah says about this night, the night of the Passover, when YaHuWaH Elohim spared his people because he saw the blood and he passed over them. In Shemoth, in Exodus chapter 12, we'll start in verse 1. And YaHuWaH spoke to Moshe and to Aharon in the land of Mitzrayim, saying, this Chodesh, this new moon, is the beginning of the Chodeshim, of the new moons for you. It is the first Chodesh of the Shana, of the year for you. So it's the first moon of the year. And we know already that is during the time of Abib. Speak to all the congregation of Yasharel, saying, on the 10th day of this new moon. So when you see the sliver of the new moon, and it can be observed, the Hebrew word shamar, we can observe the Chodesh according to what we are supposed to do according to Devarim, where it says shamar at Chodesh. And we can see it, and we count 10 days from that point in time. This is when we are to gather our lambs. It says each one of them is to take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of the beings, according to each man's need. You make your count for the lamb. Let the lamb be a perfect one, a year old. Take it from the sheep or from the goats. And you shall keep it until the 14th day. So for 4 days. At the same new moon. So 4 days later, in the same new moon, during the same month. Then all the assembly of the congregation of Yasharel shall slay it, Bain ha'arabim, between the evenings. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it. And they shall eat the flesh on that night roasted in fire with unleavened bread, because technically this is the first day of unleavened bread. The first day of unleavened bread begins in the evening when the Passover is to be eaten. On the 14th day, that is when the Passover is sacrificed. But in that evening, the Passover is to be eaten with unleavened bread, because a day in the scriptures begins in the evening. So you are to eat it with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. And do not eat it raw, nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire, its head with its legs and inward parts. And do not leave of it until morning, and what remains of it until morning you are to burn with fire. And this is how you eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it in haste. It is the Pesach. It is the Passover of YaHuWaH. We are to eat it in haste because at this time they were waiting to leave. They were prepared with their staves in their hands, prepared to take not only a spiritual journey following the great existing one, Yahuwah Elohim, but also a physical journey to a land that flowed with milk and honey. So they were to eat it in haste. And I shall pass through the land of Mitzrayim on that night, and shall strike all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, both man and beast, and on all the Elohim, all of the mighty ones of Mitzrayim, I shall execute judgment. I am YaHuWaH. And the blood shall be a sign, an oath. The word oath is often spelled Aleph, Waw, Taw. Sometimes it is spelled what is called defectively, and it is spelled Aleph, Taw. And Aleph and Taw are the first and last words, or letters rather, but they are also words in the Hebrew Aleph, Beit, or alphabet. Aleph represents the first, Taw represents the last, and Mashiach, the Messiah, literally proclaimed that he is the Aleph and the Taw. And there is a lot of information that we have already covered about the Aleph Taw, but the Aleph Taw it represents the creation. It represents the idea behind creating everything that is seen and unseen, because all things are made with letters. And the Aleph Taw is the range of the Hebrew letters that were used to create every single thing that is seen and unseen. And this is why Mashiach is called the Miltah, the manifestation, and also Dabar, which means the word. So this is why the Aleph Taw. And the Aleph Taw also appears as a place designator in the scriptures. But even in modern Judaism, it is known and understood that Aleph Taw represents Mashiach. So here it is very important to understand, because here we see that it is a picture of the oath, of the sign, of the token, of the literal. It is a literal sign. It says, and the blood shall be for an oath. It shall be for a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I shall pass over you, and the plague not come on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Mitzrayim. Now, in Hebrew, in Abrit, it reads, Ra'iti et hadam paskati alchem. Ra'iti means see I, et is Aleph and Taw, again a picture of something that can be a sign, or also the picture of the Mashiach, the Messiah, the first and the last, the Aleph and the Taw. Ra'iti, when see I et, Aleph Taw, hadam, the blood. When I see the Aleph Taw, the blood. Paskati, and leap I or pass I al-chem, over you. So literally it is saying, when I see the aleph tau, the blood, I will pass over you. One of the most important pictures of judgment that we could possibly imagine is happening. If this is not insight into the character of the Almighty One, then what would be? We see that in judgment, he is clearly showing a characteristic of himself, and that what he requires when he goes into judgment against the house of slavery is that he requires obedience. He requires the token and the oath, the sign of the blood on the doorpost, the sign of the blood of a perfect lamb that will bring forth the ransoming of the firstborn. Very, very beautiful and very deep in the scriptures, all these things that Yahuwah Elohim is trying to teach us about himself and about ourselves and where we are and how we need him, how we need his provision. And it says, and the blood shall be a sign for you in the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I shall pass over you. And let not the plague come on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Mitzrayim. So of course that would go and apply to today. When Yahuwah Elohim comes and he destroys the Babylon system, if he sees the blood, if he sees the token, if he sees the aleph tau, then he will pass over you. And this day shall become to you a remembrance, and you shall celebrate it as a Hag, as a festival, LeYahuwah, unto Yahuwah, throughout your generations. Celebrate it as a festival and everlasting law forever. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, you shall eat matzah. Indeed, on the first day you cause leaven to cease from your houses. So no leaven, no seor, all the sourdough, all those things that are fermented grains that we use to make bread rise, to make what we call chametz, leavened bread. We're to make those things cease from our homes. Okay, again, we're not talking about other types of things like minerals such as baking soda and things like that. The list goes on and on. It's very simple. It comes from the 5 grains. When the 5 grains have fermented and they create something that can make dough rise, that is called seor. No seor. It has to cease from your homes. So not just leavened bread, but the actual things that we use to make the leavened bread have to be removed from the homes. So indeed, on the first day, you shall cause leaven to cease from your houses. So when we sit down to eat the Passover meal in the evening, which begins the new day, the day of the 15th, and we're consuming the lamb with the matzah, the unleavened bread, at that point, we should have already had all of the leavening agents and all of the leavened bread out of our homes. So that we clean beforehand, and then we go into this time period. And the idea of spring cleaning actually comes from the Gentiles, the Goyim, the nations, observing the Yahudim throughout the many years as they clean their homes to get rid of all the seor and all the chametz, all of the crumbs and all the things from the leavened bread that they had in the previous year. So this is what we're to do as well, to clean our homes. A picture not only of cleaning the house, but to getting our home in order spiritually as well. Indeed, on the first day you cause leaven to cease from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread, whoever eats chametz, from the first day until the 7th day, that being shall be cut off from Yasharel. This is how important it is that you eat matzah, because Yahuwah Elohim said that if we eat chametz, if we eat leavened bread during the feast of unleavened bread of matzoth, that he will cut us off from his people. And on the first day is a Kodesh Mikra, set apart gathering and rehearsal. And on the seventh day, you have a Kodesh Mikra, set apart gathering and rehearsal. So the first day and the seventh day, as we said before, are special days. They are rehearsals and gatherings, and we do no servile work on those days. No work at all is done on them. Only that which is eaten by every being, that alone is prepared for you. And you shall guard the festival of Matzot, for on this same day I brought your divisions out of the land of Mitzrayim. And you shall guard this day throughout your generations, an everlasting law. So here I want you to note that it says that Yahuwah Elohim brought his people out of Mitzrayim on the day, on the Yom of Hamatzot, of the festival of unleavened bread, the first day of unleavened bread. And in the first month, on the 14th day of the new moon, of the Chodesh, in the evening, B'ha'arib, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the new moon in the evening. Ba'arib. The word arib or arib, which is also pronounced erev, means a mixture, literally. And it is referring to the time period at the mixing of the sun going down, when the sun sets in the western sky, and we see that we see that beautiful red over the horizon, and we see that the night has begun to come in, and about 15 minutes from that point there will be 2 to 3 stars that can be seen with the naked eye. And this time period of the mixing of the night and the day, when the sun has set, and we see that over the horizon, the picture of the erev, of the mixture, the beautiful colors that it makes, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the time of erev. So what Yahuwah says here is that we begin eating unleavened bread. This is really important because there are those who have come to this information very quickly. A lot of this information about YaHuWaH, about his Torah, is very available at this particular time period. And because of this, there are many people who have caused great amounts of confusion with all kinds of teachings that I usually refer to as flavors of the month, things that have just come out of nowhere. And one of those things are that a day in the scriptures begins in the morning. We do not see this in the scriptures. Rather, we see in the very first book, Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 1, one of the most important things that we actually will see about how to count for the Sabbath is that a day is made up of evening and morning. The Torah literally says, Wayahi Ereb, which means, and it came to be, or it came to exist, the evening, Wayahi Boker, and it came to be the Boker, the morning, Yom Achad, or a day united. And he says this for all the days of the week, and it came to be evening, it came to be morning. We know that before there was even light created, before Yahuwah Elohim said, let there be light, there was darkness upon the face of the deep. There was darkness, there was no light. Yahuwah Elohim had to speak. And he spoke, let there be light. And there came to be order. There came to be light. So we see that there is evening, there is darkness, and then there is the light. There is the time of the day. And according to this very important verse right here, we see again the same pattern. Yahuwah Elohim said, in the first month, on the 14th day of the Chodesh, of the new moon, in the evening, in the Ereb, you shall eat unleavened bread. So in the 14th day, when the sun is going down and we're transitioning into the 15th day, because we know the 15th day is the first of unleavened bread, we are to begin eating unleavened bread. So it's very clear. And you shall eat unleavened bread or matzah until the 21st day. And note what Yahuwah Elohim says. The 21st day of the new moon in the evening. So we began eating on the 14th in the evening, going into the day of the 15th. That's when we begin eating matzah. We eat it for 7 days. And when do we stop eating? In the evening. Why? Why do we start eating it on the first day in the evening and stop eating it the last day in the evening? Because in the evening, we have the ending of one day and the transitioning into a new day. A new day begins in the Torah in the evening. There is no way around it. It does not matter what extra scriptural material, something that is outside of Torah, that one may provide. It does not matter because the Torah itself says. So when there are those who say, there is only 12 hours for the Sabbath, it's only during the time period when the sun rises to the time period the sun sets, that is not true. It is false. And that would lead someone to keep a false idea of the Sabbath and to break a huge portion of the Shabbat and also break most of the feasts. So there's no point in adding confusion to the word of YaHuWaH Elohim because he gives us a picture right here in verse 18 that a day begins in the evening. That we begin eating unleavened bread in the evening because that's the first day. That's when the first day of unleavened bread begins. And we stop eating it on the evening of the 21st because that is when the Feast of Unleavened Bread ends. So it is the marking of a new day that is going to happen outside of unleavened bread the next day. So for 7 days, no leaven, no seor, is to be found in your houses. For if anyone eats what is leavened, that same being shall be cut off from the congregation of Yasharel, whether sojourner or native of the land. Do not eat that which is leavened. In all your dwellings, you are to eat unleavened bread. You are to eat matzah. So it's really important to get these days right. In the ancient times, they knew that their lives, their physical and spiritual life, the ruach within them was at stake if they broke the day of unleavened bread. One of those days, if just one of those days were broken and they slipped up and they ate something that had fermented grain that made this bread chametz, if they ate anything like that, they would be cut off from their people. They knew the importance is extremely, extremely important. Do not eat that which is leavened in all your dwellings. You are to eat unleavened bread. And Moshe called for the elders of Yasharel and said to them, go out and take lambs for yourselves according to the clans and slay the Pesach. This is referring to the literal sacrifice of the Passover. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin and strike the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. And Yahuwah shall pass on to smite the Mitzrites, and shall see the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts. And Yahuwah shall pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into the houses to smite you. And you shall guard this word as a law forever, you and your sons forever. And it shall be, when you come to the land which Yahuwah gives you, as he promised, that you shall guard this service. And it shall be when your children say to you, what does this service mean to you? Then you shall say, it is the Pesach, slaughtering, the Passover slaughtering of YaHuWaH, who passed over the houses of the children of Yasharel in Mitzrayim, when he smote the Mitzrites and delivered our households. And the people bowed their heads and did obeisance. And the children of Yasharel went away and did so as YaHuWaH had commanded Moshe and Aharon, so they did. Notice that YaHuWaH Elohim loves the children, and he tells the parents, he tells the fathers when it comes to be, that you observe this Passover as I've commanded you to do throughout your generations. And your little ones are going to ask, why is this important? What does this mean to you? Then you shall recall the mighty awesome things that Yahuwah Elohim did when he brought you out of Egypt, out of the iron furnace, out of the house of slavery, out of Mitzrayim with a mighty right hand. Notice that when the pagan children, and children can't help it, but their parents, when they teach them about pagan practices, and they ask, why do we put a tree in our home and decorate it with gold and silver? It is so sad. It's so sad. These poor children, they ask their parents, and their parents do not know. But we know. We know why. We know that it was in honor of Nimrod, in honor of Tammuz, the Asherah, the sacred tree. We know that these things are not to be done. But the reason that I bring this up is to let you see a sharp contrast between Yahuwah's Kodesh way, where he takes into consideration those eager learning minds of those children, versus the pagan way where there is no answer for those young, tender minds, those impressionable minds. But Yahuwah Elohim, he has a heart for children. He has a heart for family. The entire Passover is a family meal. It's to be done with the house. It sets us apart as a home. We're to cleanse our home, to put it in order, to be with our family, and to share in a spiritual meal where our physical bodies and our spiritual bodies are nourished by the word of Yahuwah Elohim. It is the marking of a great spiritual journey for the family, for the people of Yahuwah Elohim. And it came to be at midnight, Bein Halayla, in the middle, literally, of the night in Hebrew, that Yahuwah struck all the firstborn. That word firstborn is Bikor. And Bikor not only means firstborn, but it means first fruit. And that's really important. It's going to be really important to understand throughout the entire series of the Feast of YaHuWaH. Bikor. The Bikor is the first fruit. It is the firstborn. And it came to be at midnight that Yahuwah struck all the Bikor, all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, from the Bikor, the first fruits, or the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, and all the Mitzrayites. And there was a great cry in the land of Mitzrayim, for there was not a house where there was not a dead one. Then he called for Moshe and Aharon by night, Balayla, in the night. It's really important to know when all these things happened. Yahuwah Elohim told them, you eat this meal, you go into your homes, you do not come out until the morning. But notice what happens. He goes through the land of Mitzrayim and he strikes them down. He strikes down their firstborn, and there's a great cry in the land of Mitzrayim in the middle of the night. Then he called Moshe and Aharon by night and said, arise and go out from the midst of my people, both you and the children of Yasharel, and go serve Yahuwah as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go. Then you shall barak me too, or people say, bless me too. And the Mitzrayites were strong on the people to hasten to send them away out of the land, for they said, we are all dying. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, having their kneading bowls bound up in their garments on their shoulders. Now briefly, I'm going to explain something. The reason this is important, that it says that they took their dough before it was leavened. Of course they took their dough before it was leavened. After all, Yahuwah said we're going to be eating unleavened bread, right? Well, what this is referring to is the fact that there is leaven in the air all around you. If you leave your dough out, even if you don't have seor, if you don't have a sourdough, if you don't have some type of fermentation to start the rising of the dough, if you just leave the dough out to the elements, it will become contaminated and it will begin to rise. Now, when I say contaminated, of course, chametz or leavened bread is not a bad thing. chametz or leavened bread is actually a beautiful thing in the scriptures. It's actually used to wave before YaHuWah Elohim. The only time chametz or leavened bread is ever used, we wave it before YaHuWah Elohim on the day of Shavuot, which is called Pentecost. It is the wave offering. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is also a picture. We know leaven can be a picture of sin. And so sin is all around you. And you must be on your guard, because that sin, when it comes into contact with you, it becomes a part of you and it begins to change you. Just like the dough is changed when it becomes leavened. So that is why it says that the people took their dough before it was leavened. So in other words, they took it very quickly. They left in a hurry. That's what it's trying to let you know. They left quickly, having their kneading bowls bound up in their garments on their shoulders. And the children of Yasharel had done according to the word of Moshe. And they had asked from the Mitzrites objects of silver and of gold and garments. And YaHuWah gave the people favor in the eyes of the Mitzrites, so that they gave them what they asked. And they plundered the Mitzrites. Now, plunder takes place when one wins a war. But here the children of Yasharel did not use a single sword, nor did they use a bow or a spear. But YaHuWah Elohim fought for his people. So that is why this is such an important time, because it tells us that when we ourselves are too weak and we cannot overcome the oppression that is coming from the pagan world around us, that there is one that is greater than us, and he will fight for us, and he will redeem us. And that is just one of many reasons that we should observe the Passover. In verse 37, and the children of Yasharel set out from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, well over 1 million people if you counted the women and the children, because it says besides the little ones. So 600,000 men on foot. And a mixed multitude went up with them too. Also flocks and herds, very much livestock. A mixed multitude, because some of the Mitzrites, the Egyptians, actually came along on this journey to follow after YaHuWah Elohim and come to be his people and to go into the land of YaHuWah Elohim, in the land of Canaan, which is called a land flowing with milk and honey. So here we see that not only was this a picture of redemption for the 12 tribes of Yasharel, but it's also a picture of redemption for those who are called strangers and sojourners in the Torah. These are those who are outside of the covenant of Abraham and Yitzhak and Yaakov, and outside of the family tree, who are now being brought into the fold. And we see this in the Torah, in the Passover. It's very critical to understand that YaHuWah Elohim has always left an opening for the strangers and the sojourners. Those are the other nations. And it says, and they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they had brought out of Mizraim, for it was not leavened, since they were driven out of Mizraim and had not been able to delay, nor had they prepared food for themselves. So again, they left so quickly, the dough didn't even have time to rise naturally. And the sojourn of the children of Yasharel who lived in Mizraim was 430 years. And it came to be at the end of the 430 years, on the same day, it came to be that all the divisions of YaHuWah went out from the land of Mizraim. And it is a night of watches unto YaHuWah for bringing them out of the land of Mizraim. This is the night of watches unto YaHuWah for all the children of Yasharel throughout your generation. So the time period when we eat the Passover meal with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, this time period has been called a night of watches, a time of observance, a night of observance forever, always to be observed. And we know here clearly that the Exodus again began when? In the middle of the night. It was in the middle of the night that Pharaoh cried out and said, "Get out from my people." And they left by night. But YaHuWah Elohim says that it is the day of unleavened bread because, again, it begins in the evening. And YaHuWah said to Moshe and Aharon, "This is the law of the Pesach, of the Passover. No son of a stranger is to eat it. But any man, any servant, a man who has been bought for silver." Now, being bought for silver is being redeemed or ransomed. So one who's been ransomed, any servant, a man who has been bought with silver, when you have circumcised him, then let him eat of it. A sojourner and a hired servant does not eat of it. It is eaten in one house. You are not to take any of the flesh outside the house, nor are you to break any bone of it. And all the congregation of Yasharel are to perform it. And when a stranger sojourns with you, and you shall perform the Pesach to YaHuWaH, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and perform it. And he shall be as a native of the land. You have to catch this. This is amazing. YaHuWaH said that in the ancient times, when the house of YaHuWaH was being established, that if a man was to be circumcised, that he could be seen not only as one of his people, but as a native of the land. Now, I mean, just imagine for a moment, how hard it is to become a citizen of other nations. But yet YaHuWah Elohim is just saying simply here that if one becomes circumcised, and we know in other places it says to keep the Sabbath, the Shabbat, the covenants, that you not only became part of his people, but you are like a native of the land according to his word. But let no uncircumcised eat of it. There is one Torah for the native born and for the stranger who sojourns among you. There's only one Torah. There's not one Torah for the Gentiles who begin to believe in YaHuWaH, and one Torah for the native born. There's one Torah for both the stranger, the sojourner, and the native born. And all the children of Yasharel did as YaHuWaH commanded Moshe and Aharon, so they did. And it came to be on the same day that YaHuWaH brought the children of Yasharel out of the land of Mizraim according to their divisions. So again, remember, and just a few verses ago, verse 42, it said, "It is a night of watches when YaHuWaH brought you out of the land of Mizraim." And here in verse 51, it says that it came to be on the same Yom, the same day, because a day does begin in the evening. That is why the night after we have consumed, the consuming of the Passover and on through the night is called a night of watches. It is a part of the day of unleavened bread. In verse 1 of chapter 13, because there are no verses in the Hebrew, so we're just going to continue on. It says, "And YaHuWaH spoke to Moshe, saying, Kodesh to me, or set apart to me, all the Bikor, all the firstborn, the one opening the womb. Among the children of Yasharel, among man and beast, is mine. And Moshe said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Mizraim." But remember, again, it said they came out by night, but here it says it was the day. Remember the day that you came out, the Yom which you came out of Mizraim, out of the house of slavery. For by strength of Yad, or hand, the very first letter in YaHuWah's name is Yad, which means hand. By strength of the hand, YaHuWaH brought you out of this place, and whatever is leavened, you shall not eat. Today you are going out in the Chodesh HaAbib, in the new moon that happens during HaAbib. HaAbib literally means the ripening, referring to, again, Hasorah, the barley. And it's a time that happens when the sun begins to give more light to the earth and more warmth to the earth, and the conditions are agriculturally right for the ripening of barley. Today you are going out in the new moon Abib, and it shall be when YaHuWaH brings you into the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers, to give you a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this Chodesh, in this new moon. 7 days you eat matzah, unleavened bread, and on the 7th day is a Chag, a festival to YaHuWaH. Unleavened bread is to be eaten the 7 days, and whatever is leavened is not to be seen with you. So you don't even have any puffy breads that are made with seor at all with you. Nothing. That is the reason that, again, that we clean our homes and we get all of those crumbs and all those things of that old bread, that old leavened bread, out of our homes, so it's not even seen with us during this time period. And whatever is leavened is not to be seen with you, and leaven is not to be seen with you within all your border. And you shall inform your son in that day, saying, it is because of what YaHuWaH did for me when I came up from Mitzrayim. And it shall be an oath. The Hebrew word oath means a sign or a token to you on your hand. Now remember again, oath is spelled Aleph Tau many times, and also Aleph Wal Tau, but is a picture of the first and last, the Aleph Tau, the Mashiach. And here it is saying that this sign, this token, this picture of the future Redeemer is going to be the Pesach, and it's going to be a sign on your hand. Really, really amazing to understand when you think about it, because Yahuwah Elohim is telling us that he is going to seal us. And we will be sealed if we observe his commandments and also, of course, his feasts, his Passover. This is what it says. It says, it shall be a sign to you on your hand, and as a reminder between your eyes, that the Torah of YaHuWaH is to be in your mouth. For with a strong hand, YaHuWaH has brought you out of Mitzrayim. Now, many people, they are very familiar with the concept of the mark of the beast, which is referring to the branding of the works that are done with the hand and the thoughts that are perceived in the mind that are found in the hand and the forehead. They say, again, that this mark of the beast, many people have all types of ideas, but we know that it's to be lawlessness and it's to be observing pagan mighty ones. But people are familiar with this, with the 666. But they are not familiar with the fact that the Almighty has given his people an oath in their right hand and in their forehead. If you want to avoid receiving the mark of the beast, you must be sealed with the seal of the living Ahaya Asher Haya, the one who exists because he exists, YaHuWaH, who said that he would write his name in our forehead, who said that he would seal us in our forehead. And here he says in the Torah that the Passover is a oath. It is a sign, a token in your hand and in your forehead. And you shall guard this law at its appointed time from year to year. And it shall be when YaHuWaH brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your fathers, and gives it to you. And you shall give over to YaHuWaH everyone opening the womb, and every firstborn, every Bekor that comes from your livestock, the males belong to YaHuWaH. And every firstborn of a donkey you are to ransom with a lamb. And if you do not ransom it, then you shall break its neck. Now this is because a donkey is an unclean animal. It cannot be sacrificed to YaHuWaH. But lambs and sheep and goats and these various things are kosher, they're acceptable, and they can be slaughtered to Yahuwah Elohim. So the firstborn from the livestock of the clean things, they belong to YaHuWaH, and they are to be given to YaHuWaH. But even the firstborn of our donkeys, our unclean animals, are to be ransomed with the life of a lamb. And if you cannot ransom the donkey, his neck must be broken. Why, oh why is this the case? Many may ask. It is because Yahuwah Elohim is telling us something very crucial here. He is showing us that every life comes at a price. And every life comes at the price of a death. The firstborn must be ransomed with the blood of a lamb. This is what happened on the Passover. On that night when Yahuwah Elohim passed over his people, he saw the blood of a perfect lamb on the door. And so therefore, they had purchased the life of their child. They had ransomed their child by the blood of the lamb. In other words, there was a substitute. If that blood was not seen, Yahuwah Elohim would have taken that life. So this is a picture of the redemption. Redeeming means when something has been purchased at a price, it has been redeemed. And this is where we get the idea of redemption, the very great, amazing exodus from Mitzrayim. The Passover meal is a picture and a foreshadowing of even this decree, the ransoming of the firstborn of man and beast. And verse 14, and it shall be when your sons ask you in time to come, saying, what is this? And you shall say to him, by strength of hand, by strength of yad, YaHuWaH brought us out of Mitzrayim, out of the house of bondage. And it came to be when Pharaoh was too hardened to let us go, that YaHuWaH killed every Bikor, every firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, both the Bikor, the firstborn of man, and the Bikor, the firstborn of beast. Therefore I am slaughtering to YaHuWaH every male that opened the womb, but every firstborn of my sons I ransom, and it shall be as a sign. Now we see the idea. Listen, this is so crucial. Yahuwah is telling us that the ransoming of our firstborn is a sign, and it shall be a sign. So the Passover is a sign, an oath, and now we see that the ransoming of our firstborn is a sign in your hand and as frontlets between your eyes. For by strength of hand, by strength of yad, YaHuWaH brought us out of Mitzrayim. This is incredible. So deep is the word of YaHuWaH and all the things that he has decreed. And they are true and righteous. Yahuwah Elohim has showed us that every life comes at a price, and that the firstborn has to be redeemed. He has to be purchased with blood. Every firstborn of beast that is clean must be slaughtered to YaHuWaH. But all the firstborns of his sons, he must ransom with the price of a lamb, of a male lamb in the first year, just like the Passover was to be a male lamb in the first year. And a perfect lamb. So that son's life came at the price of the death of a lamb at the slaughter offering. And this is in Torah. And we know that this is a picture of the redemption that comes through Mashiach, who's been called the Lamb of YaHuWaH, who takes away the sin from the world. And we know that Yahuwah Elohim gave this precept long ago to Abraham when he told Abraham, take your son, your only son, your beloved Yitzhak, and get up to Mount Moriah, and there you will sacrifice your son to me. And we know that Abraham put the sticks for the kindling upon his son, and his son carried those sticks up that mountain. And he said, Father, I see the fire and I see the sticks, but where is the lamb for the slaughter offering? And Abraham spoke to Yitzhak, and he said, YaHuWaH himself will provide the slaughter offering. He will provide the lamb. And at the time when Yitzhak was bound on Mount Moriah, YaHuWaH cried out with a loud voice, and he said, Abraham, now I know this, that because you were willing to give your son, your only son, that you will follow me in all your ways. And YaHuWaH Elohim, he ransomed the life of Yitzhak, and he showed Abraham off in the thicket, caught by the horns, in a crown of thorns. There was a ram. And that ram ransomed the life of the only son of Abraham from Sarah, the promised seed. And so many years before the children of Yisrael had even gone into Mitzrayim or Egypt, many years before the idea of the Passover or Pesach had ever been, there was Abraham, and there was Yitzhak, and there was YaHuWaH, who paid the price. He gave a lamb. He provided the slaughter offering. And we know if we go even further back in time, we see that even in the very beginning, that Cain and Hebel, Cain and Abel, the two brothers from Adam or Adam, Cain, he brought forth fruits of the earth to YaHuWaH. But YaHuWaH was not pleased with the fruits of the earth. But Hebel, he knew and chose what was right. He was a man that took care of the sheep. And he brought forth a slaughter offering to YaHuWaH before the Torah had ever been written, before a prophet had ever spoken about Abraham or Yitzhak or Yaakov. In the very beginning, before there was a nation of Yisrael, before YaHuWaH spoke with the mighty, awesome 10 words down Har Sinai or Mount Sinai and gave the 2 tablets to Yisrael as a witness to keep his ordinances forever, before these things had ever happened, Hebel knew by the Ruach, the spirit, wind, and breath of the Almighty, I am the El Shaddai, YaHuWaH Elohim, that YaHuWaH was going to delight in the ransoming of life through the blood of a lamb. And so this picture thunders throughout the scrolls of Scripture. In YaHuWaH's word, we see the idea constantly of ransoming with the blood of a lamb. Now, let's go over to Bamidbar, or Numbers chapter 33, verse 3. And it reads, so they departed from Ramses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month, on the morrow of the Pesach, or the Passover, the children of Yisrael went out with boldness before the eyes of the Mitzrites. And the Mitzrites were bearing all their firstborn, all their bikurim, their first fruits, whom YaHuWaH had smitten among them, and on their mighty ones, their Elohim, YaHuWaH had executed judgment. Now, one thing that's really important about this here, clearly, is that we get a chronology, an overview, a summary of the actual timings of these events. Because we have already read in Shemoth chapter 12 that it was at midnight when YaHuWaH Elohim struck the firstborn, and Pharaoh called out for Moshe and Aaron to leave, and they pressed them for them to leave in haste, and they left in the middle of the night. And YaHuWaH said, because of this, it's a night of watches, a night to be observed forever. But here, it clearly says in the Midbar, Numbers 33, verse 3, that they departed from Ramses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month. On the 15th day of the first month. See, you have to see again, a day begins in the evening, because YaHuWah clearly said they left in the middle of the night, but here he's saying they left on the 15th day. And what is the 15th day of the first month? It is the first day of unleavened bread. That is why it says on the morrow of the Passover, because the Passover was slaughtered the day before, and it was eaten that evening going into the night, which was the night when YaHuWah passed over the children of Yisrael, and their firstborn was preserved. But YaHuWah destroyed the firstborn of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh commanded them to leave before the sun had even risen, because it says it was a night to be observed. So it was in the night, in the night. But YaHuWah says it is the 15th day, because that night, that portion of the night, the day before, belongs to the 15th day. On the morrow of the Passover, the children of Yisrael went out with boldness. So it couldn't get any more clear than that. Let's go over to Deuteronomy, Devarim, and we're going to go to chapter 16. In Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 16, we are going to pick up we're going to start in verse 1. Guard the new moon of Abib. We looked at this in great detail in the previous two lessons. This is Shamar et Chodesh HaAbib. Shamar means to observe. Et Chodesh is the sign of the renewal of the month. So it's something we can see, that first sliver, in the Chodesh, in the moon cycle of the Abib, the ripening of the barley heads. Guard the new moon of Abib and perform the Pesach, the Passover, to YaHuWah your Elohim, for in the new moon of Abib, YaHuWah your Elohim brought you out of Mitzrayim by night. Here it is, again and again and again. We know that it was the 15th day, but yet he did it by night, because that night belongs to the day. Clearly, no matter what anyone says, YaHuWah Elohim said he brought them out by night. And you shall slaughter the Pesach to YaHuWah your Elohim from the flock and from the herd, in the place where YaHuWah chooses to put his name. Eat no leavened bread, no chametz with it. For 7 days you eat unleavened bread, or matzah, with it, bread of affliction, because you came out of the land of Mitzrayim in haste, so that you remember the day in which you came out of the land of Mitzrayim. And here again, YaHuWah says it was the day that they came out of Mitzrayim, but here, just previous, he said he brought them out by night. So that you remember the day that you came out of Mitzrayim, all the days of your life. And no leaven should be seen with you in all your border for 7 days, neither should any of the meat that you slaughter in the evening on the first day stay all night until morning. You are not allowed to slaughter the Pesach within any of your gates, which YaHuWah your Elohim gives you, but at the place where YaHuWah your Elohim chooses to make his name dwell, there you slaughter the Pesach in the evening at the going down of the sun. See clearly, it says be'erib, in the mixture. When is the mixture? At the going down of the sun. At the appointed time you came out of Mitzrayim, and you shall roast and eat it in the place which YaHuWah your Elohim chooses. And in the morning you shall turn and go to your tents. 6 days you eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there is a closing festival to YaHuWah your Elohim. You do no work. So we see how important this is, and if we skip on, we're going to read some of these next few verses in the next lessons, but if we continue on to verse 16, it reads, 3 times a year all your males appear before YaHuWah your Elohim, in the place which he chooses, at the Hag Matzoth, at the festival of unleavened bread, and at the festival of Shavuot, which is called Pentecost,
and at the festival of Sukkot, which is called tabernacles or booths. And none should appear before YaHuWaH empty-handed. So we are to come before YaHuWaH with offerings. But each one with the gift of his hand, according to the barakah, or the blessing of YaHuWaH your Elohim, which he gives you. So the festival of Matzah is a very important feast because we are to perform it in its season, and every single year we are to appear before YaHuWaH Elohim. All the males are to appear before YaHuWaH at the place where he has designated. This place is Yerushalayim. Of course, we know that times have changed, that the Beit HaMikdash, the temple of YaHuWaH, has been destroyed. However, YaHuWaH Elohim, in the times of old, when the house of YaHuWaH was still standing, all the males would come before him. You were talking well over 1 million people. And all their families would also come. But they would present themselves before YaHuWaH Elohim. And they would eat this meal as a community, as a people, as a nation, together. Is a very powerful observance. Now, if we look at that first night, again, the first night of unleavened bread, it is a night of watches. It begins the day, technically. The 15th day begins in the evening. And this time period marks the timing of the destruction of Mitzrayim. It marks the time period of the exodus, of coming out of that spiritual slavery, out of that pagan system. But what does that last day, the 7th day, represent? It represents the crossing of the Red Sea. We know historically that it was the 7th day of Matzah when YaHuWaH Elohim divided the waters of the Yam Suf, of the Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea, and Moshe and the children of Yasharel crossed over on dry ground. And when they crossed the Red Sea, it was that day that YaHuWaH Elohim covered the Pharaoh and his chariots and all of his officers with the Yam Suf, and they were destroyed at the bottom of the Yam Suf. And as I said before, there are chariot wheels that remain there to this very day that mark the exact location of the great exodus out of Egypt. And it is this type of information that cries out to this generation to know that there is an Elohim, and YaHuWaH is his name. YaHuWaH has judged all the pagan Elohim, and he's destroyed them. But we know that this is a picture of the destruction, the final destruction of Babylon that is to come, the final destruction of the world system. When YaHuWaH destroys the Pharaoh, remember, Pharaoh considered himself to be a mighty one, what the Christians and other people would call a god or a deity is what they call him. In Hebrew, he would be called a type of Elohim. He considered himself an Elohim, a mighty one, a supreme one, a creator of sorts. But yet, YaHuWaH Elohim shows us that in the final end, that the one who exalts himself to be a deity, the one who exalts himself to that position of power, such as that position of anti-Mashiach, anti-Messiah, that one who calls himself a deity on the earth, he will be destroyed by the mighty, awesome working of YaHuWaH. But this time it's not going to be a sea. This time it's going to be a lake. And there's not going to be water, it's going to be fire. YaHuWaH Elohim will destroy the system. And that, my friends, is the ultimate picture of the Pesach. And that is why we should be observing the Pesach. And we know that Mashiach observed the Pesach, and it will be observed forever according to the scriptures. But let's look at this final day of unleavened bread. Let's look at the Red Sea crossing. Let's go over to Shemoth chapter 14 and look at some of the amazing treasures in the Hebrew language. We go to Shemoth 14 in verse 12. It says, "Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Mitzrayim, saying, leave us alone, and let us serve the Mitzrayites. For it would be better for us to serve the Mitzrayites than to die in the wilderness. And Moshe said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the deliverance of YaHuWaH, which he does for you today. For the Mitzrayites, whom you see today, you are never to see again. Now in Hebrew and Abrit,
Ura'u et Yashuat YaHuWaH. Ura'u, and you will see. Et, the Aleph and the Taw, the first and the last, a picture of the Messiah, the Mashiach, and it also means a sign or a token. So you will see a sign or a token. You will see the Mashiach, and then it says Yashuat, the deliverances, the redemptions in the plural form. The singular form of Yashuat is Yahshua, which means redemption. It means deliverance. It's often been translated salvation. And here we see it is telling us who the redemptions are from. It is from YaHuWaH. It says Yashuat YaHuWaH. And it is a picture of the Messiah's name embedded in the Torah in its beautiful foreshadowing, where it says literally that you will see the Aleph Taw, you will see the first and the last, you will see the Mashiach, the sign, the token, the salvations, the deliverances, the redemptions of YaHuWaH, which gives us the name Yahushua. When you combine YaHuWaH, his name, with Yahshua, you get YaHuShua. This is where the Messiah's name comes from. It is born and birthed in the ancient times. It is in Yahuwah Elohim's heart from the beginning, and here it is being given to us poetically and through the Ruach in a prophecy that we will see the Aleph Taw, the redemptions of YaHuWaH. We will see his redemption, Yahushua.
this clearly is a very prophetic picture in the wording of Moshe, where he says to stand still and see Yara'u et, see the Yashuat, deliverance, YaHuWaH. It literally calls YaHuWaH the Redeemer, YaHuWaH the deliverance, and that is what Yahushua means. That is the true Messiah's name. His name is not Jesus or Jesus. His name is Yahushua. And it means YaHuWaH delivers. YaHuWaH redeems. In verse 14, YaHuWaH does fight for you, and you keep silent. And YaHuWaH said to Moshe, why do you cry to me? Speak to the children of Yasharel, and let them go forward. And you lift up your rod, and stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it. And let the children of Yasharel go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And see, I am strengthening the hearts of the Mitzrayites, and they shall follow them. And I am to be esteemed through Pharaoh, and over all his army, and his chariots, and his horsemen. And the Mitzrayites shall know that I am YaHuWaH, when I am esteemed through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the Malach Elohim, the messenger Elohim, the face of Elohim, is what the Torah also calls the Malach, the messenger. It is not an angel the way that has been described and translated in the King James Version, various other versions. Malach means messenger. Angel is something pagan, but the Malach is the pre-existent form of the messenger YaHuWaH, the face of YaHuWaH, who spoke to the prophets of old and appeared to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the messenger of Elohim, who went before the camp of Yasharel, moved and went behind them, and the column of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. Now, let's go on over to Shemoth, chapter 15, verse 1 through 6. Now remember, the messenger of Elohim, after the children of Yasharel are crossing over on dry ground, the Malach of Yahuwah Elohim goes to the rear. This is where the Pharaoh and his chariots and his armies are coming. And this is important because in the Song of Moshe, we're going to understand more about this Malach YaHuWaH, the messenger of YaHuWaH. In verse 1, it says, Then Moshe and the children of Yasharel sang this song. Now this is after, of course, Pharaoh and his armies are destroyed by the Yom Suf. They sang this song. Now in Hebrew, it's the word shiru, which literally means they sing this song. So it implies that not only did they sing it, but they are still singing it in the present tense, which is very fascinating. They sang this song to YaHuWaH, spoke saying, I sing to YaHuWaH, Ashira le YaHuWaH, for he is highly exalted, ki ga'a ga'a. The horse, Hasus, and its rider, he has thrown into the sea. Yah is my strength and song, and he has become my deliverance. He is my El, and I praise him. Elohim is my Father, and I exalt him. YaHuWaH is a man of battle. YaHuWaH is his name. Now, why does it say that YaHuWaH is a man of battle? Because the Malach of YaHuWaH appears in the likeness of YaHuWaH, and YaHuWaH has created man in his image. Therefore, the Malach YaHuWaH is often said to look and appear as a man. When people say that they saw a messenger in the scriptures, never does it say they saw a woman with a halo. It always says that I saw a man and he spoke to me. So we know that the Malach YaHuWaH has the appearance of a man, and it calls YaHuWaH's messenger, it calls him by the name of YaHuWaH. It says YaHuWaH ish milkama. YaHuWaH is a man of war. YaHuWaH shmo. YaHuWaH is his name. In the Abrit, it says, Azi wazimrat, Yahweh Yahi, li le Yeshua. Azi means my strength. Wazimrat means and song. Yah is the short poetic form of YaHuWaH. So my strength and song is Yah, or YaHuWaH, as in hallelujah. Wayahi, and he has become li, mine, le Yeshua, unto deliverance. Here again, we see that word Yahshua, from which we get the Messiah's name, YaHuShua. And here it says that Yah is my strength and song, and he has become my Yahshua. Again, a picture of Yahushua right here in the Song of Moshe when he crosses over the Red Sea. And then it says, YaHuWaH ish milkama, YaHuWaH shmo, YaHuWaH ish, YaHuWaH is a man, milkama, of battle, YaHuWaH shmo, YaHuWaH is his name. Now, let us go over to the book of Revelation, chapter 15. And we're going to start in verse 1. And I saw another sign in the Shamayim, or the heavens, great and marvelous, 7 messengers having the 7 last plagues for the wrath of Elohim. Does this sound familiar? YaHuWaH just poured out plagues on Mitzrayim. Now he's pouring out plagues on the world system, the 7 final plagues. For the wrath of Elohim was ended in them. And I saw like a sea of glass mixed with fire, and those overcoming the beast and his image and his mark. Now, how do we overcome the mark of the beast? The beast marks us in the hand and the forehead. YaHuWaH says that if we keep his Passover, it's going to be a sign in our hand and our forehead. We're to observe his precepts, and we can overcome, and we will not be branded with the mark of the beast. It says, he saw a sea of glass mixed with fire, and those who overcome the beast and his image and his mark and the number of his name, standing on the sea of glass, holding harps of Elohim. And they sing the song of Moshe. Now, we just read the song of Moshe when he crossed the Red Sea. This song is sung to this very day. It's been sung by melodic chanting for the last 3,500 years. And here we see that it will be sung in the future. And they sing the song of Moshe, the servant of Elohim, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and marvelous are your works, Yahuwah El Shaddai. Righteous and true are your ways, O Melech, or sovereign, of the Kodesh ones, the Kodeshim, the set apart ones. You who shall not fear you, O YaHuWaH, and esteem your name, because you alone are kind, because all nations shall come and worship before you, for your righteousness has been made manifest. Now, one more thing that I would like to note about the Passover, the Pesach, the actual slaughter offering, began the first slaughter offering, the first sacrifice that would be done by Yasharel as a nation when they came out of Yasharel. We know that Yahuwah Elohim commanded Yasharel that they should give an offering called a Tamid offering. It's literally called Korban Tamid in Hebrew, which means a sacrifice forever, or a standing sacrifice, because it comes from the word Amid or Amidah, Tamid. So it means standing and perpetual or ongoing sacrifice. And this is literally done as a representation of the idea of the Passover, because the Passover, in a way, brought birth to all the other slaughter offerings that would be given. But the reason that I wanted to bring attention to this is because the idea of Tamid is definitely directly related to the word Amid. Tamid means perpetual, Amid means standing. The prayers that are done 3 times a day that were observed by Daniel in the land of Babylon are called the 3 standing prayers, or the Amidah. And these are done at the time in the morning when the morning slaughter offering, the sacrifice, would be offered to Yahuwah. The morning oblation was given. This would be the time of prayer. And at the time of the selecting of the evening slaughter offering, which would happen in the middle of the day, would be another time of prayer. And then in the evening, that slaughter offering that was selected would be sacrifice, which would initiate the 3rd prayer of the day, of the standing prayers. And if we go to the book of Revelation in chapter 5, it says in verse 6, "And I looked and saw in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures, and in the midst of the elders, a lamb standing." A lamb, Hasi Amid, he is standing. Again, he is a lamb, which is a picture of the slaughter offering, and he is standing, and he is a picture of the everlasting, perpetual slaughter offering that is made once and for all. A picture of all slaughter offerings that would happen. And it is summed up in the picture of the Lamb who is standing in the midst of the throne. And it says, a lamb standing as had been slain, as had been sacrificed, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 ruchot, the 7 spirits of Elohim, sent out into all the earth. So, again, we know that this standing obligation of the oblation, of the slaughter offering, is a picture of a time of prayer, a time to reflect, but it is also a time to remember the the Aleph Tau, the Mashiach, the first and the last, who is the Lamb, who is standing, the perpetual Korban Tamid, the standing offering. He is a picture of this offering forever. Now I want to look at a few examples of the Pesach being observed throughout the scriptures. The first example I want to look at is in Joshua or Yahushua chapter 5. And I'm not going to read this material right now. I'm just going to summarize, but I would love for you to go and read Joshua, Yahushua chapter 5. You see in the book of Joshua, who is called Yahushua, which he was named by Moshe the prophet. He was his successor, and he would lead the children of Yisrael into the promised land. And now we see in Yahushua chapter 5 that he begins the observance of the Passover with the nation of Yisrael as they are in the plains of Jericho or Jericho. and they honor the Passover. And then a messenger, a malach of Yahuwah, comes and speaks with YaHuWaH, the son Ben Nun, the son of Nun, who was the successor of Moshe. Again, this is interesting. The malach Yahuwah. And we know that YaHuWaH, the Messiah, who came several thousand years later in the flesh, is the malach Yahuwah. Now he's standing before a man whose name is YaHuWaH, and he comes before him and he says that he is the captain of the host of YaHuWaH. And then he tells YaHuWaH how they are going to tear down the walls of Jericho. And the walls come down not by any type of strength of hand from man, nor by any weapons of war, but Yahuwah instructs specifically that they are to march around Jericho for 7 days. Now, this is really interesting because this marked the beginning timing of the unleavened bread. So on the first day of unleavened bread, they began to march around Jericho. And every day, for 7 days, they marched around Jericho. But on the 7th day, when they marched around Jericho, on that final day of Matzah, remember this was the time when Yahuwah destroyed the Pharaoh. And on this day, when they had marched around Jericho, they had not spoken. They had not shouted. There were no sounds made for those 6 days. But on the 7th day, when they surrounded Jericho and they marched around Jericho, they shouted. The scriptures say, shout, for Yahuwah has given you the city. And when they shouted and they sounded the ram's horns and the shofars, those walls, the walls of Jericho, came tumbling down. And we know that the ruins of the city of Jericho remain to this day as a witness against this wicked system, the wicked system of the world. Jericho was a heathenistic system, a system that was involved in human sacrifice and idol worship and all types of evil corruption. And Yahuwah Elohim destroyed the walls of Jericho. And he did it on the last day of unleavened bread. That last day of unleavened bread is showing us a picture of the destruction of the walls of Babylon, the destruction of the walls of the world system, when Yahuwah destroys this worldly, corrupted system and all of its sinful ways. And he sets up his kingdom, his Malkut, and it reigns forever, and there will be no end. According to the book of Daniel, there will be no end to its government. Hallelujah. So the 7th day, the final day of Matzah, the 21st of the first month, is a beautiful rehearsal forever. We are preparing. We are preparing for the destruction of the Babylon and for the regathering of Yahuwah's people. And we long for that time, the time of Mashiach, and it's coming very, very soon. Now let us look at another inspiring picture of the Pesach, of the Passover, in the scriptures. We see with the king Yoshiyahu. His name means deliverance of Yahuwah. And he was 8 years old when he began to reign. And we can read about his story in 2 Kings chapter 23. And I specifically want to start in verse 21. It says, and the sovereign, the king, commanded all the people, saying, prepare the Pesach, the Passover, to Yahuwah, your Elohim, as it is written in the book of the covenant, in the Torah. For such a Pesach, Passover, had not been prepared since the days of the rulers who ruled Yasharel, nor in all the days of the sovereigns of Yasharel and the sovereigns of Yehudah. But in the 18th year of sovereign Yoshiyahu, this Pesach was prepared before Yahuwah in Yerushalayim. And also Yoshiyahu put away those who consulted mediums and spiritists and the household mighty ones and idols and all the abominations that were seen in the land of Yehudah and in Jerusalem, in order to establish the words of the Torah, which were written in the book that Hilkiyahu the Kohen, the priest, found in the house of YaHuWaH. And before him there was no sovereign like him, who turned back to YaHuWaH with all his heart, and with all his being, and with all his might, according to all the Torah of Moshe. And after him none rose up like him. We see here that the Pesach in Yoshiyahu's day, this particular Passover observation, was like the rebirth of the nation. The nation had been tainted with the worldly system. They had been corrupted with the seor, with the leavening agent of the world, and it began to mix into the fabric of who they were, and they were observing times and seasons of the idols and doing all of these abominations. But Yoshiyahu, who commanded the people, observe the Passover. And what do we do for Passover? We clean out all the seor, all the leavening agents that are fermented, and all the chametz, all the leavened bread. And here we see the spiritual application is that Yoshiyahu knew it's not just about bread. You have to get out all of the witchcraft and idolatry and all of the worship of the goyim, of the nations, of the Gentiles. All these things had to be eradicated. All of the spiritual leavening must be removed. It was a type of revival for the land of Yasharel, a rejuvenation for the people. This great king, Yoshiyahu, he understood the heart of YaHuWaH. And now let us look at a future application for the Pesach, in which we will see that the Pesach, the Passover of YaHuWaH, will be observed during the 1,000-year rule and reign of Mashiach, during the kingdom, the Malkut of YaHuWaH, and is written in Ezekiel chapter 45, speaking of a time that has not yet been, a time that is to come. In verse 21, in the first month, on the 14th day of the new month, you have the Pesach, a festival of 7 days, unleavened bread is eaten. Now, in context, of course, if you read these chapters, you will see that it's definitely talking about the time of Mashiach, because it says that the house of YaHuWaH will be built and that there will be a stream of water that comes from the most Kodesh place, and it goes all the way to the Dead Sea, and it heals the waters of the Dead Sea, and along the streams of these living waters, Mayim Kayim, there will be the trees of life that bring forth a different type of fruit every single month, according to the 12 tribes of Yasharel. So we know that this is talking about a time in the future when the Pesach will be observed. We anticipate the arrival of the Mashiach when he will come and rule and reign. And the Torah shall go forth from Zion as Yahuwah Elohim has spoken. Thank you for watching part 1 of Pesach, Passover, and Matzot, the unleavened bread. In the next segment, we will talk more about Passover, the Pesach, and the festival of Matzot, unleavened bread, in great detail from the perspective of the Brit Hadashah, the renewed covenant, or what people have called the New Testament. And we will see that Yahushua HaMashiach, the Messiah, observed the Passover, the Pesach, and he commanded his students to do so, and we are also to do so today, according to his testimony as well. Yahuwah be with you, and barak you, and keep you. In Yahushua's name, shalom, shalom.